Scott Lucas is a professor of international politics at the University College Dublin. He's been watching events in the Middle East closely as the G7 leaders begin their talks in Canada, and he joins me now. Scott, good to have you with us once again. Now, we know that the Israel-Iran conflict will be dominating these talks in Canada, but there are new lines coming from the Iranian government saying that they're now looking and threatening to pull out of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. How do you read that from Iran?
I think that's the least that we could expect from Iran, given the intensity of the Israeli strikes since Friday. This is a war. We need to be very clear. This is now a war between Israel and Iran, with Israel's attempts to break the Islamic Republic and Iran retaliation. So if you are at war as Iran is, they're going to say, well, Israel and the countries we see as being allied with it, especially the United States, why should we be involved with them in talking about our nuclear program? So the talks with the United States were scuttled only yesterday. Now Iran says we come out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And of course, that leaves the open question, which is, would Iran, under these conditions of being at war, decide we'll go farther with our nuclear program, which is not yet at the point of being able to make a nuclear weapon? Will we go farther by enriching uranium beyond 60% to more than 90%, where we have the potential for that weapon? They're at least putting that out there as a possibility if Israel does not stop the attacks.
But do you not think that the damage that Israel has done to its nuclear facilities, not to mention the nuclear scientists that Israel claims to have killed, not put them back a generation in terms of their timeline for enriching uranium?
Well, certainly it will be a setback for Iran, but they're not going to say that. They're not going to say, oh, well, that's it. You've put us back from our uranium enrichment, which they'll say is for civilian purposes, because that effectively would be acknowledging surrendering, a defeat. So what they are saying here is effectively, we still have this capability. Really, do you want us to keep working on this capability where we move towards a nuclear weapon? Is that what you really want? So, it's at the level of rhetoric when they talk about pulling out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty at this point, but it's very serious rhetoric, because at some point, the war is going to have to end. And unless you completely obliterate the Iranian leadership, that prospect that Iran will try to rebuild its program will be back on the table.
So what can we expect, given what you've just said? You believe that these two countries effectively at war. This then is the most serious escalation of the Israel-Iran conflict we've seen in quite some time. We know them to de-escalate in the days and weeks. But how different is this, and how do you expect Iran to first retaliate and then Israel to respond?
Again, I need to put it across to your viewers how serious this is. This is not like one of the serious confrontations between Israel and Iran since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. This is an unprecedented confrontation where we are right now. The scale of the Israeli attacks, where you have the combination of trying to hit nuclear sites, trying to hit other military facilities, indeed hitting oil facilities, with what in effect are assassinations of the Iranian leadership. They have assassinated not just military commanders, but a top aide to the supreme leader, and they are assassinating them in their homes in high-rise blocks in Tehran. So in other words, there's no attempt to protect Iran's civilians from this. They will be, that horrible phrase, collateral damage. And then Iran in response, remember, it was only last year that Iran for the first time fired missiles on Israel. Now, not only are they firing missiles, but they still have the capacity, as we've seen only a few hours ago, to fire more than 100 missiles at a time. Now, the scale of Israel's casualties, we've had around about 20 to 25 Israelis killed so far, is much less than the hundreds killed in Iran. But still, it's unprecedented on both sides that you'll have that type of damage. But I think the significance beyond this is Israel's stated aim with this operation was, oh, we're just going to go in and we're going to prevent Iran from having nuclear capacity. No, we are far beyond that. Israel is trying to break the Islamic Republic. They're trying to break the leadership. And even if they are not envisaging regime change and the idea of a rebellion to overthrow the Iranian leadership, they want to put Iran in a place where it can no longer function domestically as well as throughout the region.
Did Israel see what you say as, the attempts to break the leadership there? Was Israel emboldened by the fact that, its allies, Hezbollah and the Houthis, have been severely hampered by strikes on both organizations, but also the responses coming in from respective Arab states that they've effectively condemned the strikes by Iran. So we're talking about Saudi Arabia, UAE, and even Qatar.
Yeah, I think, and let's be specific, the Netanyahu government has been emboldened by two motives which take place here. The first, you're quite right to point out, is that Israel, as it continues the open-ended war in Gaza, has done a great deal of damage to Iran's allies. The killing of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, and indeed most of the Hezbollah leadership. Of course, most of the Hamas leadership has died during the attacks on Gaza. The attack on Iranian commanders that was taking place in Syria, even before this latest escalation. So it's like, in assassinating the Hamas political leader in Tehran last year, Ismail Haniyeh. So yes, we can get them, but the scale of going to get them, I think, ties to a second motive, which is Benjamin Netanyahu, the minute that the war stops in Gaza, has some political and legal challenges. Politically, if Hamas is not destroyed, he faces the call for early elections, especially if there is Israeli hostages still held in Gaza. Legally, he faces the trial and bribery charges. So what do? You open up a new theater. Just as they attacked in Lebanon last year, now you open up the biggest theater of all, which is you can't get rid of me because you need me to fight this war in Iran. And if this is an open-ended war on Iran, where do the Arab states stand? Well, that's the interesting point. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, none of them would have wanted Israel to do this, but they're not going to come forward to the point where they're going to join Iran in a retaliation against Israel. They're going to sit on their hands because, of course, a lot of them, especially Saudi Arabia, have been rivals of the Iran's religious leadership in the past decades.
And where do you see the U.S.? That's a big factor here because Donald Trump, he doesn't want the war. He wants all sides to strike a deal. Easier said than done. He is staying out of this, but has warned that if Iran attacks its bases in the region or kill Americans, they will be drawn into the conflict. Do you see that happening?
We have to start with Donald Trump and be very honest here, which is Donald Trump has two contradictory messages in his head, which he then puts out on social media. One is, I'm the peacemaker. Let's get a deal. And indeed, remember, up until Sunday, we were supposed to have the sixth set of U.S.-Iran talks over the nuclear program. But the second thought in his head is one that he can easily put to the fore, which is, if Israel has attacked Iran, Israel has a blank check to strike. In other words, he keeps telling Iranians, you should surrender to me, or there's going to be more of this. So in effect, Benjamin Netanyahu will not have any check from Donald Trump, or indeed from the Trump administration, including at the G7 today. The Trump administration will probably stand against any statement which condemns Israel for these attacks, because a lot of Americans will support these Israeli attacks on Iran, and because the political calculus is we would rather stand with Israel rather than against Israel when it comes to our own elections next year.
Okay, Professor Scott Lucas, appreciate your analysis as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.